Hello, I'm Emily Edwards, an intern with Climate Film, and what you just watched was Mugshots in the Digital Age, a film that brings reality out of the shadows. A short film in our K college student in our northern category, and with us today is the film director, Sarah Shively. Sarah, it's nice to finally meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Emily.
So, something I like to start off in every interview is what was your thought process when you were directing and writing and producing the film?
Sure. Well, this came about because I was taking a class on digital ethics
Hmm.
at the time. And what got me on this particular topic was that I was reflecting on a situation which you learn about in the film, where I had come across a mugshot of my brother.
Hmm.
And as I had thought about that, I mean, it had been a little upsetting to stumble upon it because it wasn't even a recent image. It was, at that time, it was like 11 or 12 years past. And yet there it was. It was still just online. And I got to thinking about how I didn't know about it, but I just thought that that has got to have some negative impacts on his life. My brother and I aren't particularly close, but I I later talked to him about it. And yes, this is definitely something that affects other people's lives. And then I began having these conversations with other people and realized that, it's pretty tragic what
Hmm.
a mugshot can do to somebody. And the problem with putting these mugshots and these booking photos up online is that they're taken at the point of arrest, which means that this is before charges have been pressed. And so these people whose pictures we're looking at that point in time, they're innocent because they haven't been proven guilty of anything. And in many cases, most of the time, in fact, charges are dropped. So it can really be damaging to someone. And so that was underlying the whole story. The difficult thing with the project, however, was that getting other people um, who have been impacted by this to want to speak about it publicly was kind of hard. People don't want to go on, on camera and talk about this. So that was a bit of a challenge, just coming up with people who were willing to talk with me about it.
Yes, I was curious, how did you find people that were willing to talk about their mugshots being online, stuff like that?
Yeah, so I pretty much had to leverage existing relationships. I Morgan Godwin was the person who was most liberating with her content, and
Hmm.
Morgan and I had already known one another for a while and have been working on several projects together. And so she was she's a real advocate and activist in this space, and so she was more than happy to help me there.
Hmm.
Um, and Darcel, who I also interviewed for this, Darcel is already, or was already a local celebrity at that time, and I had already interviewed her for another project. And so again, this was just leveraging an existing relationship and someone who was more than happy to talk about it, and also knew Walter, Darcel's, the man behind Darcel. Walter knew that sharing this information could have a positive impact on other people's lives, and he was more than willing to go on camera for me as
Hmm.
Walter talking about this incident. So that was really fantastic because most of the time he becomes Darcel, that's usually what you see. But in this particular interview, he was entirely out of costume and out of makeup. The interview with Therese Bottomley was really a wonderful boon. She is the editor and vice president of content for the Oregonian and Oregon Live. And she's also a huge advocate for uh, open resource, open records in the state of Oregon, making sure that we have as much transparency as possible
Hmm.
uh, with our government documents. And so that was a really nice sort of voice to have in this mix, because she, in fact, was not in support of the House bill that was trying to clamp down on the release of the mugshots. And yet, at the same time, she was very aware of the problem and the negative influences. And she also was able to speak about how a news organization like the Oregonian has been dealing in a very um, ethical manner about the presence of mugshots that they have been posting. And the rules for them have changed over the years too, but um, even from the very beginning, they were much better than many other organizations across the country. And they didn't have these mugshot galleries where people were just sort of clicking on and looking at people's mugshots. They never did that. And they really have worked very hard to remove mugshots that, especially if people have written to the paper and said, look, this is really impacting my life.
Hmm.
They've been very responsible about that.
Interesting. Yeah, it's very weird that stuff like that is public, and I feel like it should be more of a private matter because stuff like this is like keeping people from getting jobs and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And fundamentally, as the is revealed in the piece, the the booking photo is really just a law enforcement tool to be able to put a name with a face. And over time, that kind of got out of control. And part of the reason why journalists wanted to be able to have open access to this was really to watchdog police. In other words,
Mhm.
if someone comes in and they've been beaten by the police and that's reflected in their mugshot, journalists want to be able to see that image. But that particular argument it's the exception to the rule. That's not normally what's happening. And when we got to the Portland protest situation, where these booking photos were being aggregated by Andy No and some other right wing journalists, it was out of hand. I mean, they were just putting hundreds and hundreds of these photos up there and creating this Antifa image and all this kind of thing. And it was just really the extreme of what can happen when these are just available for anybody,
Mhm.
to just go to the county website and pull these images.
What was it like making a documentary like this? Like, what was what was it like doing such a hard topic?
Well, we had been, sort of groomed for these kinds of projects through the course of the multimedia journalism program I was in at the time, and it takes a little bit of gumption to reach out to people, especially if you don't know them,
Mhm.
and say, I'd like to do this interview. When I said that I got the interview with Teresa Bottomley at the Oregonian, for example, I was able to leverage the fact that she also is a good friend of the professor that I was studying under, right?
Mhm.
So had I reached out to her without that connection, it might have been more difficult. If I tried to reach out to Walter Cole, aka Darcel, without having previously worked with that person, it would have been more difficult.
Mhm.
And there were a couple of other people that I, again, sort of knew through various people who had mugshots up, and I didn't get those interviews because I didn't know them personally or know them well enough. And even, frankly, my own brother, I never got an interview with my own brother
Really?
on this issue. So you kind of have to you have to roll with it a little bit. You know, you have to do the best you can with what's coming forward. It may not turn out exactly the way you want it to, but you just do the best you can.
How long did it take to make a documentary like this?
Well, this one was pretty run and gun. I mean, I was the entire crew. You know,
Mhm.
I was just doing it myself. I was shooting myself even, you know. And because there was a deadline involved, because it was a course, for a course I was taking, it was really just a matter of a few weeks pulling this all together. Um, Normally, a documentary takes longer than that, and you have more crew involved, and you know it's a bigger project. This was a get what I could get as quickly as I could get it kind of a thing.
Mhm. Yeah, something like this takes a lot of research. What about the research? How long did it take it since you had a deadline?
Oh, that's an interesting question because I did do a fair amount of research on it, and there were certainly things that I didn't know in terms of the history of FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, and that kind of thing. Um, I think one thing that helped with this particular project was that I was pretty clear going in what I wanted to get. The one thing, however, that was a sort of fortuitous coincidence was that I didn't actually know at the time that I started the project
Mhm.
that the Oregon State Legislature had a bill out there to withhold the mug shots, or from releasing their mug shots. And I didn't know that. But the great thing about that was then I was able to go to Oregon.gov and get the recordings from the sessions that they were having when they were talking about this. And the Sheriff Landers was in one of those. We hear some of the legislators speaking about it as well. And some of those I sat through and watched them live, but a couple of them I was able to grab the content afterwards and work it into the film. And that was really just timing, just the
Mhm.
luck of the situation. I think, I was acutely aware that at that time that this was a problem for people who had been protesters and even police in Portland. So I knew it was a timely issue, but I didn't actually know when I started the process that there was a bill that was going
Mhm.
through the legislature.
So you do have location changes in your film with like at the interviews with all the people you did and yourself and stuff like that. What was that like doing all those changes? Did you have people read off questions and send you a recording, or did you go to them and interview them yourself?
The interview with Morgan was a Zoom interview, but the interview with Teresa Bottomley and the interview with Walter Cole were on location.
Hmm.
So in those for those two, I went to Teresa's home and I went to Walter's home and set up with Teresa in her backyard and with Darcel, or with Walter in his kitchen. And the shooting that I did of myself, I did in my own home office. And the camera equipment that I was using was on loan from the program. We have a whole uh, closet full of cameras and so on. And so it was fairly portable. So setting up the camera, setting up the audio gear, that took a little bit of time. But these were all single camera shoots, and fairly quick, just tripod. I wasn't using um, a gimbal or a second shooter or anything else.
Hmm. Interesting. Usually, someone usually has at least one cameraman that's helping them out a little bit.
Yeah, not in this case. And where I really where I really paid the price on it was in the interview with Teresa, because I did set it up outside, which was a mistake because my light continued to change on her throughout the course of the interview. And in some of the moments, it was just comical because, suddenly the light had not been in her eyes, and then suddenly it was in her eyes, and all this kind of stuff. And so I had to, cover some moments and that kind of thing, because sometimes she'd be saying something that was really important and I wanted to include, but she couldn't see very well because the light was right in her eyes. So
Mhm.
yeah, it was a good live and learn situation. I'll never do that again. I'll make sure I put people inside and have more controlled lighting. But at that moment of time in time, I didn't think our interview would last quite so long, and the light outside was so nice, so I thought I could get away with it.
So your voiceover, how did you go about doing that? The voiceovers.
Well, this is my mic right here. It's a very old, probably about a 50-year-old CAD.
Mhm.
But this old technology is very stable. And, I have the Audition software on my computer. So I just make sure that I have the door closed, no distractions, and record.
Recorded. That's really amazing. I've had a few people say that they had to take quite a few shots for their voiceovers.
Yeah, I probably did do some
A
retakes for
few.
sure. I mean, anytime I do voiceover work, I always give myself 3 or 4 options.
Hmm.
So, I had a script at that point. By the time that was fairly late in the process, by the time I was actually recording myself. And so, I had my script and I read it 3 or 4 different ways. And then when I went to edit it, I was selecting the version that I thought sounded best in that situation.
You find it weird when you are listening to your own voice over a recording?
I used to. I used to when I was younger, sure. I've gotten used to how I sound.
Mhm.
And so yeah, it doesn't bother me anymore.
Doesn't bother you anymore. I think it's something that always bothers someone for so long now.
Well, it does sound different outside your own head.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else you would like to add to mugshots in the digital age?
I think something that doesn't show up in the film itself that happened afterwards, that I just want to make sure people are aware of, is that we did a panel discussion at the Portland Film Festival last year when we did this.
Hmm.
And at that time, Teresa Bottomley had the opportunity to tell Walter Cole directly that she made sure that the Oregonian removed his mugshot. And that was a positive impact and outcome of this project. And I was very pleased about that. I mean, it was in that sense, it was only one person who was affected, but it was because of this project that happened. And that panel discussion that we had, Sheriff Landers came to that. We
Hmm.
were really able to dig even more deeply into this topic. And it ultimately, well, very recently, Darcel passed away, as you probably know. And Teresa Bottomley had been reflecting in her personal column on various topics that Darcel had intersected with her on. And she mentioned this piece and she mentioned the panel discussion in particular.
Hmm.
And so I feel like this is a conversation that needs to be had, and not just in Oregon, but in many, many places. And, the whole point of the course I was taking, digital ethics, was really addressing a variety of ways in which our digital age has some problems and has compromised material and privacy and issues around people's identity and so on.
Hey, thank you so much, Sarah, for being a part of the Klamath Independent Film Festival.
Thank you. I also just wanted to mention, and I'm not sure that you had put the two together or realized this, but I'm also the producer of the Darcel on Life, Living, and Dying that'll also be at the festival.
Nice. Look at you go.
Yeah. This is one of the few times that I have a double header at the moment, just by coincidence.